So, who's made a GitHub pull request before? Oh man, not too many people. Shoot. Okay, I was hoping there would be more hands, so let me explain something really quick. So open source is everyone knows what the term open source means, yes? Yes. Anyone not? Okay. So the basic principle, you have something you need to do that software will solve. So you create the code to do that thing. You put that code out in the open, someone else finds it useful, they come over, contribute, boom, you have an open source community. That's how most open source software gets started. That was a very, very long time ago. Nowadays, we have our modern digital infrastructure that is run largely on open source software. So a friend of mine, Chad, uses the example of your iPhone. If you go to the terms and service, there's something called beerware in there. There is open source software that is licensed under a beerware contract where it says you can use this, and if you ever want to buy me a beer, go ahead. Fantastic contract. So there is an issue with that, though, in that we are starting to put a lot of pressure onto the maintainers of these open source projects, these critical pieces of digital infrastructure that run literally everything in our digital world. And at the same time, there's a very limited number of funding streams to get money to these people. These are people who are contributing to their passion for the past number of years because they've built a project and people are using it and they want to see people continue to use it so that if a bug gets reported, you better damn well believe they're going to try and fix that bug. At the same time, they're not getting paid for that, so they're working a 9-to-5 job. They probably also have family and friends and a life that they would like to, have. So what happens is they burn out. It's a very stressful job being an open source maintainer. And the only way you can get money for it is through a grant, let's say through NSF, NIH, or through a private philanthropic organization, something like the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, the Gates Foundation, organizations like that. This is an issue. So what me and a couple other people decided to do is let's add another source of funding to that funding stream. So we created an endowment. It's a community-owned endowment. The goal is to have folks donate to the endowment. For those who don't know, an endowment is a purse of capital that is never spent. The principal is never spent. It gets invested in responsible, conservative ways that produce typically a 5 to 7% return. If you're looking at traditional endowments at universities, those returns are then used to advance the mission of the endowment. So if we grow this endowment over a number of years, let's say it's a $100 million endowment, you get 5% of that year over year, you get to use that to support open source maintainers. And now if it's a community-owned and community-led endowment, the open source community itself is deciding how we're going to distribute that theoretical 5% return on $100 million. That sounds fantastic, but that has nothing to do with science, or does it? So let's switch into science. All of these slides are GPT. I had a lot of fun doing this, figuring out how to get it to do images, so I would recommend it at this point. So funding for research is very similar to what I just described. There's very few avenues to get your research funded. You can get a grant. Moving on. So you start with the patron era, you go to the government era, there's a bunch of stats up there. After World War II, the government really did the majority of the grants, and over the past, let's say 30, 40 years, it started switching over to businesses who are, you can see papers and research coming out of Sony, IBM, Microsoft. They're doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So the question is, what is the next era of funding? Where does funding come from for research moving forward? And it's not as though as we transition between eras, one era supplants the previous one. It's just we add different ways to get funding. For example, I could go find a patron right now, I suppose. Or I could get government funding, or I could get funding from a corporation. So when we look at these different funding streams, we are looking at governments that fund a little bit and very, very slowly. A lot of this was already talked about today, so I'm not really going to hit on it. Feel free to read it if you want. They fund a very little bit very slowly, and the things they fund are not replications. Everyone's looking for novelty. At the same time, a little separate, but same time, we're spending $3 trillion in the top 15 economies worldwide on R&D. 1 billion of that is coming from DeSci. So that's a number to keep in mind. There's a lot of potential growth if DeSci starts taking more of that pie. Now, businesses, they fund a lot. They're doing, I think it's like a 60 to 70% of the funding right now. But they fund differently. They're not wanting to fund basic research all the time. They want to fund things that support their business model and advance their realm. And they want to fund things that make money. And right now, that's biomed, that's AI. God, that's AI so much right now. But you're not going to get foundational research in astronomy out of a business. It's going to be rare. So it's still a great funding stream. It's just we're not covering all our bases yet. And at the same time, if we look at the amount of global R&D we're doing, 3 trillion versus global GDP, 200 trillion, very small percentage of funding of GDP goes to funding research. And when we look at how ridiculous that is, research is one of the things that produces GDP. It improves all our standards of living, and it produces a huge return. $1 produces $4 to $7 over a course of, let's say, 20 years. You can get really short returns if you want, if you're looking more for that business perspective, or you can get really long returns. We're still reaping the benefits of general relativity. It's a fantastic thing to fund. Why don't we do it? Well, because we have very limited funding streams. And the government has their motives, businesses have their motives, and patrons, I want to find a patron. I would love to see patron funding take off again. So we should be funding more research. So DeSci, we have the opportunity to take more of that 3 trillion. We also have the opportunity to add more to the 3 trillion. Let's get that 3 trillion up to 10 trillion out of 200. So how do we do this? Perhaps through the next era is going to be network-based funding. We just saw fantastic DAOs that are kind of starting to take advantage of this, where it's crowdfunding, but there's also like token economics getting worked in here, and a couple other interesting things. But in order to really do network-based funding, we have to shift the way we do research altogether. So instead of hoarding data until we publish, we should publish data every day, and that data in itself has intrinsic value. Same with software. Software has intrinsic value. I don't need the data I use for my research, for my hypothesis, could be valuable to someone else's hypothesis. Peer review can get funded. Anyone should be able to contribute. Right now, in order to do research, you have to be part of MIT, Harvard. You have to be part of a university and an institution. You can't just come in and create data and get paid for it because someone's using it to explore their hypotheses. And then we switch, this ultimately switches what research is from a storytelling endeavor, from hypothesis to publication, to just creation of modules. And it's very much like open source. I can create different packages of different value, and then we tie it all together to create a suite of software. So how exactly will we get to this sort of modularized system? We're going to need DAOs, we're going to need distributed work incentivization, we're going to need verifiable open infrastructure, and IP NFTs. We've talked about this all day, so very quickly, the BioDAO cohort, fantastic DAOs to look into. You just heard from them. Not going to say any more there. Incentivizing distributed work. We heard a little bit about this earlier. I forget exactly which project it was, been doing a lot of running around. Another project is called Gridcoin. It distributes currency to people who contribute processing power to research projects. So we helped model the spike protein, we helped discover asteroids, that sort of thing. It's been around for a very long time. DeSci Labs, heard a bunch about that for verifiable open infrastructure and IP NFTs, molecule bio, et cetera. Okay, so we get that infrastructure. Now, where does the money actually come from? How do we go from $3 trillion to $10 trillion? Or how do we go from $1 billion to $1 trillion if we're not even going to add more money? But I really think we should add more money to the $3 trillion because we generate currency. Bitcoin is produced every day. What if 5% of all Bitcoin emissions were put to a community-run treasury or an endowment or something like that, that was used for basic research? There are hundreds and thousands of blockchains that are producing currencies of value every day. So circular blockchain, commit 5% of the emissions to it, to foundational research. And how that endowment or how that treasury is managed is up in the air. There's a lot of interesting governance things we could do with that. If we were to do that, we're basically NSF at that point. NSF does about $8 to $10 billion a year in funding. It's napkin math at this point because the value of every token changes every day, but we can think like $100 billion get produced every day just from token generation or currency generation. 5% of that, we're NSF. That would be amazing. And then as more capital comes into crypto, that number just goes up. We could probably compete with the amount of funding that comes out of full nation states. Another one, treasuries. Money, so the open source endowment I was talking about, it's essentially a treasury. People put money in, it's managed, money gets distributed one way or another. With cryptocurrency, the wild thing here is that money in the treasury can go into other DeFi products, can be used to stake, can be used, well, staking is really the main thing, but that staking can produce currency or can be used to prioritize lists of value, like you were actually talking again, like one of the bio DAOs was talking about prioritizing lists by having people stake currency behind what research should get done. So treasuries would be very interesting to see used in crypto to fund foundational research. And then regenerative research economies. This is where you combine everything to get very complex. I'm going to show you a picture in a second that is just really fun, but I definitely do not have time to explain it all. But I'll just show you the picture. So you enjoy. Talk to me afterwards if you want to go into it. So I've only got a couple minutes left, but this cycle takes in everything from the market buying a vaccine from someone who created a vaccine, let's say, from an impactful research from an impactful outcome that was discovered from an approved researcher who used the public's computing to produce that impactful outcome. And the money made by the translator, whoever produced that vaccine, trickles down through the system all the way back to the people who provided the computing in the first place, incentivizing the public to find valuable research and put their computation behind it, because if that computation turns into a product that's sold, they get rewarded. Same with, and that incentive follows the entire thing, entire train through. You also have the crypto security economics, you also have the benefactor economics in there, and here's a nice little ledger over here. It's a lot of fun. Okay, so GPT tried to write hypothesis twice. I kept this in here because we're still not there, guys. We've got a lot of work to do. So with my minute left and shoddy internet, I'm going to try and show you what the modular research cycle might look like. Is there little prototypes? Let me put this on 2x. Okay, so you've got someone in here who's got a methodology. They're publishing it. And, oh God, this is going way too quick. Okay, and then they're saying $100 to anyone who uses this methodology to produce some data. This person comes in and says, I will do it. No, this is the bounty. They're saying, use this methodology to produce data because I want to use the data that comes out of this methodology. Someone else comes in and says, fantastic, that's great. I'll put another $1,000 into that. The people who put money down vote on which proposal gets accepted, and you end up starting to get this graph that Ellie was talking about earlier. You've got a methodology for data collection, you've got data collected, you've got the people who funded it all. Now, someone comes in, sees the data, is going to make a bold claim that the sky is red, and they want someone to create software on top of the data that will prove or disprove that claim, and they're really rich, because they're making this crazy claim and all rich people are crazy. So it's $100,000 on this bold claim that the sky is red. People come in, say, okay, I'll make this code. Code gets funded, gets developed. You now have this graph starting to form. You skip ahead. People can ask for replications because someone's like, the sky's definitely not red. Please reproduce this code or reproduce this result using this code on this data, et cetera, et cetera. And then you end up with a very large, let's go back. This graph that Ellie was talking about earlier of research modules from hypothesis to claim, including software attestations. This little green guy over here was attested to. And then someone can come in, and you've got funders on here too, so you're giving credit to people who give money to research, because that is a very, very valuable action. And you can follow it all the way through. You see people creating drugs, using a different data set to create a different drug. And imagine putting an AI, putting an agent through this. It would just be a lot of fun, and I'll stop talking here. This is just some random sample. Imagine if we started doing this in the actual corpus of knowledge that we already have. It would be a lot of fun. So, thanks.
Thank you so much.